Now we're into a Floyd Rose setup. I've got the perfect guitar. It's an Ibanez Gem. The customer stripped off the finish and used a blowtorch on it and got this camouflaged burnt wood look, and it's kind of cool. And Steve Vai autographed it, which makes it even cooler. And he's one of Ibanez's most important players. We're going to install new strings before we work on the bridge. And all the problem this guitar has is in this area. Everything's out of whack. Before starting, you have to make sure the guitar is basically set up to Ibanez specs. That's 5/64 clearance on the low E at the 12th fret with the strings open, and a 16th on the high E, and these are way low. So I take a 3mm wrench and raise the pivot studs up to raise the whole bridge on each side until I get that measurement. There's some pivot posts that you can't directly use a 3mm wrench. You have to go inside of it with a smaller wrench and loosen a set screw first. I'll show you one of those in a while. This isn't that type. I'm raising the bridge. This is the other style of Floyd Rose that I spoke about, that uses the secondary wrench with the set screw down inside the pivot stud. That's 1.5mm. You have to loosen that set screw before you can raise or lower the pivot with a 4mm wrench to set your string height. You know when this tremolo sits level because you can see the sharp blade here. It's a piece of spring steel on the edge. You want that piece to be level with the top. So this wrench fits down inside that pivot stud. You can't see the hole. I can't even see it without the camera. But never raise or lower the pivot stud unless you've loosened that set screw. Otherwise you're free to raise it and lower it under string tension. As I raise the studs, I'm making sure that I'm in tune. Everything changes the tuning that you do to one of these bridges. We want to be in basic tune. I'm also going to loosen the claw, back the springs out a bit, the screws that is, to get less tension on the springs because it was pulling this bridge too deep into the body. We want this plate to sit level with the top. If I had the bridge sunk into the body like it was, incorrectly, and set my string height, then when I leveled the tremolo out, the strings would go higher and I'd be way off. That's a little too much. I'm going to tighten that back in a little bit. Then retune. You'll be tuning up many times as you do this. It's just the way it goes. Now I have 5/64 and 1/16. That might be a little bit tall for some of you, but you can lower it later. You can lower it a lot, especially if you put the neck in the neck jig and leveled the frets as we've done. But this is where we're going to start. Now we take off the strings. To do that, you tilt it forward and slide something under to hold it. This is called a Tremlocks Grip Master. It's made for this job. Jim Donahue at Ibanez uses a fuzzy stick. It's a paint stirrer wrapped with felt. He's got a 1/4-inch version and a 1/2-inch version depending on what he's working on. This way, when you take the strings off, the tremolo springs won't pull the bridge down into the cavity. I like to remove the pressure pads from the lock nut completely during the setup. We don't need them right now and it's hard to string underneath them. That's a 3mm wrench, the same wrench that I used on the pivot studs. The same 3mm wrench will loosen the string clamps. What I'm doing now is removing 3 of these screws with a 2.5mm wrench that hold the saddles down, and I'm going to move the saddles to the front row of holes. That's where they should be. There's 2 sets of holes for a wide range of travel, but in general we want to have the saddles in the front. While I'm in there, I'm going to use a toothbrush and clean the dust out of these parts. There's a lot of dirt down in the Allen head there, which keeps the wrench from going in comfortably. I took a broken tape measure and cut a 40-inch section out, took off the little tip on the end, and it's a flexible ruler. I'm going down the center of the neck, and I want to see a 25-inch measurement at the front edge of this D-string saddle. Even though it's tilted forward, I can get a pretty good ballpark there. That's where I'll tighten that. And I set the rest of them to a certain look that I know in my mind. Here's a photograph of a well-intonated Ibanez Floyd Rose bridge from page 110 of my book, How to Make Your Electric Guitar Play Great. That's the D string, and you can see the different saddle points where they're adjusted. That's a good place to start and how I set up these. Once I get this look, then I loosen all the screws and slide the saddles backwards so I know they'll be flat. And then when I set my intonation, I creep up forward on it. And if there's a kink in the string, it's behind the saddle, not in front of it. As I'm installing these strings, I'm cleaning as I go. There's a lot of dirt in here. It's down in the cavity there, and it's in the string ramp. It's on these string locks too. It's worth cleaning that out. I'm backing out this claw until there's about an inch of space there, which is a lot. It's still enough for the screws to hold into the wood, but it loosens up those springs so they don't have an awful lot of pressure. You need enough spring pressure just to pull the knife edges into their pivot posts and keep them there with the bridge propped by the fuzzy stick. We don't want the springs to have any major effect on the setup until it's finished. Now I can put on new strings. I cut the ball ends off and throw them away. Some people actually string through the tuner and let the ball end sit at that end. I'm really glad that I cleaned out these string ramps. They were oxidized and full of lint. You think that would have really made the string have a dull sound. Now tune each string almost taut, but loose enough that finger pressure can press it down easily. Nothing near to pitch, because when you take out the fuzzy stick, the springs still have enough pressure to pull the bridge down close to being level or even into the body, like that. Now the strings are fairly taut. Next, we're going to block the tremolo so the springs are taken completely out of the equation. In this case, my bridge is sitting slightly forward. It's not flush with the top. You can see it tilted there. That's when I come in the rear with a tapered block of wood and shove it in between the tremolo block and the body and adjust it accordingly until it brings the flat plate of the tremolo flush with the body. Now the plate is sitting level with the top, thanks to the wedge. We already rough set our action to factory specs earlier using the pivot posts. Now I can set my intonation and tune to pitch without fighting the battle between the strings and the springs. Without the block, what you do is you'd be tuning to pitch, the bridge goes forward, you tighten the springs, it pulls back, the strings go sharp, you tune them flatter and the bridge goes forward, and you go back and forth for an hour and a half. Using this method, it's very fast. Once we get to pitch and set the intonation, all I'll do is tighten up those tremolo claw springs until the wood block drops out, and then the springs and the strings are in perfect balance. Before I set the intonation, I'm double checking the bridge saddle radius. It should be a 16, and it is. I'm using an under the saddle gauge. I compare that to the fretboard, which should be a 16, and I could have checked it earlier when the strings are off. It's not a problem because I have these notched radius gauges, and this is a 16, so that's a perfect mate. If the bridge saddle was out, there's a series of 5/1000 metal shims with holes bored through them that you can put under the saddles and lock down with the screw and customize the saddle radius. I don't need to do it now, and I can get right on with the intonation.